One or good morning for those who are in the US for this webinar organized by the Center on Regulation in Europe on AI and competition. So we will present two reports that have just been released by our think tank and that are available on the website of CERRE, so CERRE.eu. One is a report which is a bit more general on AI, cloud, and competition, which has been authored by Zach Meyers and Marc Bourreau, two CERRE fellows. And then another one which is on the same topic, but a little bit more AI agent competition and DMA, which has been authored by Friso Botstoon and Jan Kramer, also CERRE fellow. So how we will organize this webinar of 1 hour and a half. First, we will start with a presentation of the main recommendation of each report by their author. So the presentation will focus on the recommendation of the report, but of course, all those recommendations are evidence-based. And so if you are interested by how the author came to those recommendations, you are welcome to read the full report, which, as I said, is available on the CERRE website. And then we will have a discussion among different panelists on those recommendations. And, you know, in the CERRE spirit, we want to hear different voices regarding this topic. So the voice of the firm, the voice of the regulator, and the voice of the academia. And so I will introduce the speaker when we go to the panelists. And then we will finish by the European Commission, which, as we all know, has a very important role in all of this because the Commission has several tools to intervene in the market, antitrust tool, the DMA, and others. And so we are very fortunate to have someone from DG.com who will also give his takeaway of the discussion and the recommendation that we have in the report. Please also don't hesitate for the audience to ask your questions. So there is the Q&A function on Zoom, so you can ask a question, either general question or if you have some specific question to specific panelists or author, don't hesitate to ask them in the chat, and then we will address it as we go during the debate with the panelists. So please don't be shy, and we will try to address the questions which are raised in the chat, because we also aim to make this webinar as interactive as possible. Okay, so having explained what we will do, let's do it then. And so I will first give the mic to Zach Meyers, so for the presentation of the recommendation of the first report.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. And I'm very pleased to present this report, which I've co-authored with Marc Bourreau, who'll be joining on the panel later. Could I grab the first slide, please? So to provide some background and context to our report, of course, as everyone knows, there's been this report by Mario Draghi, which is really focused on the economic problems facing Europe and has said that productivity growth is one of the biggest of those problems. And so to address that, we need European businesses to become more efficient, more productive, and more innovative than they are today. And it seems pretty clear that AI foundation models are going to be one of the key technologies that European businesses can use to achieve this goal. And I think a second problem that's raised in the Draghi report is about Europe's lack of strength in ICT. And that's been responsible for a lot of the economic growth that America has seen. So AI is really important in Europe for two reasons. One, in terms of take-up and productivity, and the other, to make sure that European firms finally have a chance to catch up and get a foothold in some of the digital sectors where it hasn't been strong in the past. And of course, to achieve either of those things, we really need competition to be effective. And that means that startups in Europe and elsewhere have a fair opportunity to jump into the market. And also that AI firms are forced by competition to continue innovating, to have high quality services, and to be cheap so that businesses can use them. Can I jump to the next slide? So the purpose of our study was kind of threefold. The first was to examine state of competition in the sector, not just looking at competition between AI firms, but also some of the markets or sectors where there are inputs to AI, things like high performance computing power. Secondly, we look at how competition might evolve in the future and whether there are kind of harms to competition that we might see emerging. And thirdly, what competition authorities or other policymakers should do if we identified those risks. And so in addressing these questions, we sort of answered two broader questions at the same time. The first one was about when regulators should act when it comes to digital markets in response to prospective theories of harm, because we know in other markets there has been a view that regulators have maybe acted too late. And so getting the right balance between preemptive intervention versus waiting to see how the market develops is something we wanted to explore. And the second one was how competition policy should examine highly innovative sectors compared to more mature ones, which is something that, you know, perhaps competition authorities haven't been as able to manage in the past. So if we can jump to the next slide. We basically thought about two ways of looking at competition in the AI sector. One is the more mature approach, which you tend to see in markets where technology is a bit slower. You think about things like price, quality, market shares. And the other is a more innovative, dynamic approach to competition. And this is one where you don't really want to focus so much on things like market shares, because you have customers or businesses that are experimenting with different technologies and services, trying to see which of them are going to resonate and create efficiencies. And even if there is one company that has a big market share today, there can still be lots of room for others to grow because the market hasn't really crystallized yet. And in this second approach, you want to look at different types of metrics, like are different types of AI companies able to attract funding? Are they able to pursue disruptive innovations, not just ones that support business models of today's large firms? And thirdly, do the big players in the sector, are they acting like their position is at risk, or are they looking like things are very comfortable? And so a dynamic assessment of competition is a bit less certain, because you're thinking about, you know, what are the potential competitors that could emerge? How might technology evolve in the future? But it's really the best way of understanding in these kind of fast-moving sectors whether we're seeing good value for users. Can we jump to the next slide? So the AI value chain is pretty complicated. You've got chip design, you have chip manufacturing, you have the need for AI developers to get data to train models. Those models then need to be coded, they need to be trained using computing power, fine-tuned, and then they need to be gotten to customers either through online cloud computing platforms or by embedding them in existing services. All of that's kind of in the report, but there's two things I wanted to bring out here. One is competition between AI model developers. And our conclusion here is that actually competition at that point in the value chain is looking pretty positive at the moment. There are kind of thousands of foundation models that are out there, and some of the smaller models seem to be performing really well against those that have cost a lot more to produce. And the second is about competition between providers of accelerated compute. And this is kind of the high-end computing power that's needed to train AI models. And here, I think our analysis is a bit more complex. So if you look at it in a kind of static measure, you see that there are three companies, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, that have quite a large proportion of overall AI developer customers. But I think what we see when you think about this in a more dynamic sense is that there's a lot of change happening in this sector. So you have kind of specialized providers like CoreWeave that are entering in and really providing quite a lot of competitive pressure on some of the big, more established players. And then you have a lot of change in the way that AI models are developing. So a lot of them are now focused more on taking the outputs of the very largest models that are expensive and have to use the biggest cloud computing providers or accelerated compute providers, and are now focused on things like fine tuning. And so that's giving these smaller providers of accelerated compute a lot more ability to get into the market and find customers. So we are actually seeing that there's a bit more dynamic competition than just looking at things like market shares would suggest. And in particular, I think one of the things that's interesting is the way that Apple, Meta, NVIDIA, several other big tech players seem to have quite strong incentives and the ability to make sure that there is true competition between these providers of accelerated compute power, and they don't want it to be just a small number of companies that are playing a big role in the sector. So, so I think what we saw is that there are some good indicators that maybe authorities should wait and see before intervening. Can we jump to the next slide? I'll skip over this because in the interest of time, but I think basically what we're seeing is a lot of change in this sector. And in particular, kind of radical innovations like DeepSeek, which obviously got a lot of attention a couple of months ago, that are showing that you don't necessarily need to have the same huge amounts of capital that some competition authorities originally thought. Where we did think that there might be risks is around access to inputs for AI developers. And these are inputs like specialized data sets, access to accelerator chips, where NVIDIA currently has quite a strong position in the market, and then access to large models. Because as I said before, a lot of AI developers now are working with large models and using them to either fine tune or develop their own models, basically trained off these larger ones. And so we think that it's important to take a commercially realistic view of these sorts of risks. So for example, with data, we're really not talking about large data sets that are in the public domain, because they've been used quite successfully by a lot of different developers to establish their own large language models. Instead, we're looking at kind of targeted data sets for particular use cases. And similarly, I think when it comes to accelerated chips and platforms for delivering foundation models, what we see now is that a lot of the companies in the sector really want to make their services available as widely as possible and to be as open as possible. So therefore, we think the right approach here is to be measured. And that means promoting industry-led measures to promote things like trade-in data and to help customers be able to move their data from one AI model to another, or from one accelerated compute provider to another. And then authorities to keep a targeted scrutiny about the business practices of especially very large firms in the sector. And that's not to create kind of blanket rules, but rather to make sure that if there is a cause for antitrust action, that they can act quickly. Can we jump to the next slide? I think another big problem that competition authorities have been looking at is the fear that AI developers, which use third parties to get their accelerated compute power, might become locked in. And in particular, that could give hyperscalers a lot of influence over the way that AI developers produce their models or what they do with them. And there's both kind of technical barriers to switching, which are well understood by competition authorities already. And I think these can be quite difficult to address through regulation, because a lot of the barriers are created by things like innovations by cloud computing companies to create kind of new functionality and features that other providers aren't able to match. And so we do want to promote switching, but do it in a way that allows this kind of differentiation and service provision to continue. And I think in particular, we need to take into account that AI developers are fairly sophisticated companies. You know, they're not corner stores that are using cloud computing for the first time. So, you know, they should be able to take into account the risks of getting locked in. The second problem is around commercial barriers, and these are kind of twofold. The first are fees that are charged by cloud computing companies when you want to move your data out of the cloud to a different provider. And these do seem to pose barriers to effective competition. And so our recommendation here is that policymakers and regulators need to enforce some of the rules that the EU has proposed has put in place, for example, around the Data Act, to limit these fees. And secondly, that we should look at the discounts that are offered by some accelerated compute providers, again, with a view that discounts are usually pro-competitive. They lower barriers to entry, and you often see discounts in markets that are really competitive. So it's just important to make sure that these don't have the effect of locking AI developers into particular providers for a really long time. I think we can go to the last slide now. And this is the final risk that we deal with in the report, which is around, I guess, the risks around vertical integration. In particular, we acknowledge that there are a couple of big players that have pretty strong positions across the whole of the value chain, or a number of different parts of it in AI. And so this poses some risk that they'll have too much influence over the future of AI, including limiting innovations that could threaten them. And again, I think, you know, this risk is a real one. It's one that competition authorities need to be conscious of, but it also needs to be balanced with some of the benefits that we see from vertical integration. And, you know, we've seen this in other markets as well. For example, if a big firm is integrating AI into some of its existing popular services, that can be a good way for consumers to discover and experiment with the service, and it provides a guarantee of a big customer base, which can provide the incentive that you need in the first place to make kind of big, risky investments. The important thing is to make sure these practices don't freeze out small AI developers, but that's not something that we're currently seeing. And I think in particular, when it comes to AI cloud computing partnerships, what we're seeing is that a lot of these are actually pro-competitive and benefiting small AI developers. A good example of that is the OpenAI arrangement with Microsoft, which initially looked quasi-exclusive. But what we're seeing is that OpenAI has then been able to go on and reach partnerships with some of Microsoft's competitors like Oracle and CoreWeave. There's a growing sense that OpenAI is perfectly able to compete with Microsoft head-to-head in some markets. So these partnerships generally don't seem to be anti-competitive, even though authorities should keep a close eye on them. I'll wrap up now, but just to say that authorities obviously have seen in the past that acting too late can sometimes lead to digital markets having kind of one or two big players that are very difficult to dislodge later. And so it's quite right that authorities are thinking about, do we need to stop that dynamic happening in AI? And how quickly and preemptively should we move? I think what we see in the report is that there is a stronger possibility in AI that the sector will remain competitive without regulatory intervention, in part because of the way that the technology is developing, much more focus on operational costs rather than just big upfront costs and then huge economies of scale. So I think what we're proposing overall is a balanced approach which tries to protect the current dynamics and make sure that intervention is kind of evidence-based and targeted. What we don't look at is downstream uses of AI, in particular the future emergence of AI agents. And I'll hand over back to Alexandra, who can introduce my CERRE colleagues who have looked at this in detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zach, for this very comprehensive presentation. So I repeat, for those who joined later, the two reports that we present here are available on the CERRE website already. So you can find everything in detail on the website. And I also encourage you, if you want to ask a question to the author or later to the panelists, to ask your question through the Q&A function of Zoom, so we can address that later in the discussion. So indeed, as Zach was saying, I mean, their report was relatively general, and now we will focus on a more specific issue, which is AI agent and how what kind of risk again they may raise, benefit also, and how the EU regulation and in particular the DMA could prevent those risks. So for that, we have Friso, one of the two co-authors, to present the recommendation. Friso, the mic is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. If you can pull up the slides. Great. So Nid, our question was about DMA and agentic AI. Now, agentic AI, you can see as sort of the next step in evolution of AI. We went from traditional AI bots to the generative AI assistants that we now know in the forms of ChatGPT and the like, which based on prompts provide helpful answers. Going in the next phase to agentic AI, which can not just work with prompts, but with wider goals that have been set by end users and can achieve them with a high degree of autonomy. Importantly, they learn not just from large data sets as foundation models would, but from interacting with users, so true experience. Next slide, please. We already have some first views of agentic AI in the form of prototypes by OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, and some other firms. But importantly, these prototypes rely on the browser as the place where they live. They sort of mimic human interaction with a browser, clicking through different websites. A browser is useful. It has access to, of course, the web, but also passwords, credit card information. But we don't think this is the end state. It has severe limitations. We believe that the next step would be to deeply integrate AI agents in operating systems for them to reach their true potential. Next slide, please. Now, AI has a number of building blocks. I'll go over this quickly. Zach has already talked at some length about cloud and foundation models. I won't mention that. I think what's important for our purposes, as I mentioned, is that this agent has to live in some kind of carrier, whether that is the browser as is now, or in the future, we believe the operating systems of, in particular, mobile devices will make them more functional because those allow them to perceive and interact with their environment, which is an important requirement for them to carry out those high-level tasks and goals. Next slide, please. So we start by looking at the competition concerns. Is there an issue to be solved? Which, of course, is a bit speculative because we're at the start of the development, but we can look into the future and see two main issues that might arise. The first is the foreclosure of AI agents. If you have, for example, an OS provider with their own integrated AI agent, they might want to preference it or give disadvantage the third-party competing AI agents. They could do so through input foreclosure, so deny them access to hardware and software features that the third-party AI agents needs to operate, or to deny them access to data, user data in particular. Foreclosure could also happen at the distribution level, the level where it is put in front of users. You can think of OS providers pre-installing their own agents, setting it as the default, and similar self-preferencing or tying techniques. Now, a more distant, a more futuristic concern is foreclosure by an AI agent. This is in a potential future where AI agents themselves have become gatekeepers, either because one or a few of them have become truly dominant, or because their users, either on the end user side or the business user side, have become locked in. At that point, the AI agent provider itself can foreclose, for example, to self-preferencing of affiliated services, tying services together, and so on. Next slide, please. Now, to start with the scope of the DMA, of course, do AI agents fall under the DMA? Now that question counts mainly for this foreclosure by AI agents, so this more future-looking concern. It's not an immediate one. Well, the question then is whether they qualify as a core platform service, because DMA has a limited list of those. We checked a lot of options, but I narrowed down here to the virtual assistant category, which we believe is most fitting. You can see the definition there. It's a rather broad one. Virtual assistants process demands, ask for questions, and on that basis, provide access to other services or connected physical devices. As a definition kind of shows, this virtual assistant category made its way into the DMA by thinking of voice assistants like Alexa and the like, but at the same time, it has a very broad definition. Now, does AI agents, do they fit under that definition? We believe so, at least in the near to midterm. We see AI agents as the next evolution of what was once voice assistants, AI assistants, and then finally agents. They have a much higher degree of autonomy, and that's important to recognize. But at the same time, given this broad definition in the near to midterm, it likely captures them. What is more problematic, again, in the near to midterm, is the definition of business user, because those refer to developers that explicitly interoperate with the agent. But an agent with a significant degree of autonomy might rather call upon these business users without explicit permissions in that regard. There's a need here in the shorter term to adapt. We then go to the next slide. Then something quickly on the obligations. For this first concern, a foreclosure of an AI agent, of course, the relevant core platform service here is the operating system, and those have already been designated, so that's no issue there. Operating systems have to abide by or operating system gatekeepers have to abide by a number of obligations. I'll just pick out some of the important ones, make sure their own apps, specifically AI agents in this case, are uninstallable, that defaults can be changed. They even have to provide a choice screen, provided that they are designated at both the operating system level and the virtual assistant or AI agent level. And they have to provide equal interoperability with hardware and software features, which is important because AI agents would draw on those, make heavy use of those to achieve their tasks. Next slide, please. Data is also very important, as I noted, for the effective operation of AI agents. The data portability obligations led by the user would apply. What would not apply is the sharing of click and query data, which is imposed now on search engines, which we see as a rather poor fit for AI agents. So that's one omission. Another one is that gatekeepers cannot force business users to integrate with several of their services, ID services, payment services, browser engines. But this does not extend to AI agents either. Then go to the next slide. On our second concern of foreclosure by the agent, and again, that lies more in the future, we have a pretty neat coverage of the obligations. Certainly, if AI agents would be designated in that virtual assistant category or a future amendment of it, then the self-preferencing, default obligations, etc., apply in our view, sufficient way. So if we then move to the recommendations on the next slide. Okay. So what our conclusion is based on this analysis, and I invite you to read the report for the in-depth one, is that the DMA, perhaps surprisingly, is a pretty good fit for the coming rise of AI agents. This has to do with the fact, first, that operating systems, which we see as their most likely carrier, are already part of the DMA and have been designated, and we have some view to how these obligations apply, but also because perhaps somewhat by accident, having these voice assistants in mind, legislators included a virtual assistant category that is wider than just simply capturing voice assistants. Nevertheless, our first recommendation is to mitigate some ambiguities in that definition of virtual assistants. Like I said, it still refers to, it has some remnants of those voice assistants that they have in mind, even if in the near to midterm, AI agents can be brought under that definition without, an interpretative stretch. In the longer term, when these AI agents become truly autonomous and are not just given prompts or even goals, but infer user needs and take action based on that, well, then this sort of user input paradigm that is in the definition might need some legislative amendment. And there's a whole procedure to do so, of course. What needs more immediate attention is the business user definition. This can be done, changed to a delegated act by the Commission, so it's more or is less legislatively intensive, and to account in that definition of business users for the potentially quite passive nature of the business users that are called upon or invoked by these AI agents. On the thresholds, etc., we don't see any need for change. We're going to move to the last slide, or the second to last one. It concerns the obligations themselves. So here we see two main obligations that require some adaptation to this new AI agentic paradigm. One regards access to data in 611. Like I said, this now applies to search engines, but given that AI agents truly learn from user experience, the input from users, and that does not need to be shared currently under 611, there is a case to extend that provision from search engines to also include virtual assistants. The second recommendation regards that Article 5.7, that's about the forced integration with ancillary services, now covering browser engines, etc. But again, we believe there's a good case to also include in that AI assistance, so that, say, an OS gatekeeper cannot force specific AI agents to integrate with their specific APIs and so on. We're going to move to the next slide, and here I will be very short and conclude, because this is broader considerations based on the vertical integration in this chain that Zach already mentioned, the existing industry partnerships. Of course, as these AI agents are further downstream, they are very much affected by what happens upstream. Even though this is not in the immediate remit of our reports, we do, as a side recommendation, recommend taking a look at 612 and whether that needs to be extended to cloud computing services, so that access, which AI agents also rely on, remains very reasonable and non-discriminatory. We see some other gaps, such as that DMA does not address partnerships themselves so much between ecosystems. The DMA focuses on what happens within an ecosystem, but given that does not really fit with the logic of the DMA, we also don't make any recommendations in that regard. And so I'll stop here and pass it on to the panel for discussion.
Thank you very much, Fraser, for this again very clear presentation of the report and its recommendations. So as you see, I mean, we have two reports with some different scope and different type of recommendation, but so that's what we wanted to discuss with the panel. So let me introduce the panelists, and then we'll run it. So we have in the order of when they will speak, Chloe McEwan from Microsoft, Aurélien Mael from DuckDuckGo, Leonardo Calini from Meta, Rubin Chen from ARCEP, the French regulatory authority for telecom, and then the two other co-authors of the report, Marc Bourreau from CERRE and Paris Telecom Paris Tech, and Ian Kramer from CERRE and the University of Passau. So what I suggest to run this panel is, first I will ask each panelist what are their take on those recommendations, and more specifically, one recommendation they like in what they have heard, and one they like less, so things could have been improved or could it be more nuanced. So we will do like this for a first round, and then we will engage with the panelists and with the audience. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. I see that Mark Dempsey has already won. Thank you very much, Mark. And then we will anyone else in the audience who wants to ask question, please type your question in the chat. But so let's go for the first reaction, and let's start with you, Chloe.
Well, thank you, Alexandre, and thank you, Zach, Friso, and Mark, and to the entire CERRE team for your work and collaboration on these reports, which are, a fantastic piece of work. My remarks are focused on the cloud and AI report, but I was very interested to hear and to learn more about the agentic AI one just now. So thank you, and I'll be studying it deeply. I guess in putting together these remarks and in thinking about answering your question, Alexandre, about recommendation we like and a recommendation that we think could be improved, it's important to think about why we're looking at these things and what the goal is here. And for me, the goal is set out in the Draghi report. So why are we looking at AI? We're looking at AI because Mario Draghi tells us at page 25 that there are clear signs that AI will revolutionize several industries in which Europe specializes and will be crucial for EU companies' ability to remain leaders in their sector. And Draghi references pharma, medical devices, automotives, freight, passenger transport, and energy. So why is it so important? Well, we need the cloud and the AI to support that transformation, that competitiveness, and that productivity. And that's where we all have a role in supporting that expansion to economic growth. I think it's helpful also to recall exactly what it is we're talking about when we're talking about cloud and AI, and to really bring it to life. AI is a general purpose technology. Think about electricity, something that runs across the whole economy. And it's a really innovative technological development that can really lead new scientific progress, new social and economic opportunities, and boost all sectors of the economy. And we've done a lot of work looking at how can such technologies lead to the best economic success. And it's all about diffusion. So diffusion of these technologies is critical as a driver of productivity growth that will lead to economic and scientific progress. And so in this respect, AI users are generally more productive, and we're already seeing productivity gains in businesses using AI versus those that don't. And that productivity advantage is also closely linked to digital capabilities and skills, and research suggests more competitive firms are more likely to adopt AI in the first place. And so I just really want to remind ourselves that this is why it matters. Then reminding ourselves, so what are the layers of the technology that we're talking about? So the first layer, we could talk about, and this is quite conceptual, but it's the infrastructure on which the models are trained and deployed. So building that infrastructure out is really intensive. And we're talking about the land at the very bottom of the stack. It's the land, it's the planning, it's the energy connections that you need. And then you've got obviously the chips, which we talked about, and the connectivity, and then of course the associated skills and expertise. Then at the second layer, you've got the AI foundation models themselves. So we've spoken about them. The large language models serve as a general basis for then a broad variety of different tasks, trained on extensive data sets, lots of different types of information, and those can then be fine-tuned for adapted for different tasks or applications. And we all remember, of course, probably not that long ago, when none of us had heard of large language models, but here we are. The top layer is the AI applications. And so that's really where we're talking about the diffusion here across Europe, and using them for all of the different types of commercial and other and academic applications that can be distributed to relevant users. So I guess to conclude, what we support most is the recognition about the need for the diffusion as a precursor for economic growth. Really support your take on this being the important role that AI is going to play in boosting Europe's economic growth and competitiveness. And we think that broad AI diffusion is going to be one of the most important drivers of innovation and productivity growth of the next decade. On the kind of recommendations that could be maybe even better, we support the DMA in principle as being designed to address, a lot of issues that may already exist. We think that cloud is not an intermediation market. It's much more of an infrastructure sector. And so we'd probably query whether anything is needed on that. But we'd also support that, regulators should, of course, be keeping a really close eye on all these markets to ensure that they deliver benefits for European consumers.
Thank you very much, Chloe, for this introductory statement, and I couldn't agree more. And of course, diffusion is one of the key elements of the success of our competitiveness. And so the question is how we ensure diffusion, and I think next to diffusion, competition is part, of course, of this element. So thank you very, very much for this. Let's go now to Aurélien from DuckDuckGo for your take on those recommendations.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alexandre, for the invitation and also the fantastic work with these reports. So maybe quickly how we approach AI as a privacy company that offers a search engine and a browser. So AI integrates into these products, and we do this integration. And conversely, AI first products like chatbots also integrate web search. And so chatting significantly overlaps with both searching and browsing. So we offer assisted answers on our search engine with AI, but also a chatbot that is essentially a privacy layer to popular models. And our approach is really private, so there's no login, no tracking, and the chatbot history is locally stored. It's, of course, useful to deliver quicker and more useful answers, while at the same time not cannibalizing results on the search engine. And optional, our AI products can be turned off by the user. So this type of overlap, in our view, means that that the same practices are going to trigger similar concerns. And besides the formidable opportunity that AI presents, we also see that this kind of equally supercharges the existing privacy and competition risk that are associated usually with searching and browsing. And so on the privacy side, of course, and that's why we believe in our approach so much, longer queries invite more personal information to be provided and heightened risk of profiling. And then, of course, AI agents, by definition, or at least is often the case, work by learning from the user, and by definition also with tighter profiling. On the other hand, on the competition side, we have the two similar issues that we face on the search market. On the one hand, the issues on default integration that is really well, I think, captured in the report by Friso and Jan, sorry. And I would say that here, in a way, Google is already dodging the DMA rules on the show screens and is switching by setting Gemini as the default on Android and Chrome. Not that Gen AI products are by definition covered by the DMA. I know it's a debate, but what is clear that chatbots can be a search access point. And what, as these usages are likely to become more important, we see the risk that the DMA loses in relevance and efficacy if these practices are not addressed. So that was for chatbot. For agentic AI, as very well stressed by Friso and Jan, these services need to be deeply integrated into the operating system or even the browser. You can also have AI agents that work via the browser, which make the interoperability rules, on Android or operating systems in general, very important, as the dominant platforms will have a natural advantage there. And the concern we have is justified by the fact that already today, Android does not provide the necessary APIs for such access points. And so we see this risk being potentially heightened in the future. Maybe finishing on the point around access to data, which is featured in both reports. The trial in the US on Google search showed that on the particular issue of accessing search data, Google has, of course, a considerable advantage. And search engines that integrate AI or conventionally chatbot that integrate web search essentially face the same challenge there. And we think that also the aspect of data sharing is important there and should probably go beyond click and create data. And to finish on that point, on the several remarks that were made about virtual assistant fitting within the DMA, we would say that why not granting click and create data to these services? But I would stress that the obligation right now doesn't work for search engines, and so there would need to be maybe more attention into making it work. And at the same time, there is a gap that exists right now on the DMA, not addressing the issue of directly licensing such results, which could bridge that gap faster.
Thank you very much, Aurélien. Sorry for the step. So can I ask you one just follow-up question? Is your impression that, on the basis of what you said, is your impression that the development of AI agent will amplify the problem that the DMA has identified and try to solve, or could it solve it through a technology solution or through a technology disruption, I would say? So how do you see the advent of AI agent?
No, so that's what I meant. It's the amplification aspect. So that essentially, there's, of course, these usages are new, and the technologies are also changing the way these things work. But would clearly say maybe build on existing practices, and so the same problems in relation to capturing defaults, making it hard to switch on the one hand, and then on the other hand, foreclosing access to critical inputs such as such data, are going to create the same issues, but amplified by the fact that these products need to be more deeply integrated on the one hand, and on the other hand, probably, search, as I said, are essentially facing the identical challenges.
Okay, thank you very much for this clarification. Let's go now to Leo from Meta. What is your take on those recommendations?
Yeah, hi everyone, and hi Alexandre. First, also joining Chloe and Aurélien in thanking the academic team behind the reports. I think that it was really important work, and especially in light of the consultation launched by the European Commission today on the DMA review. So it's a very important question, the one that we're facing in the two reports, and it was a real pleasure to follow the work behind them. Before I get into some of the recommendations on the reports, just two quick words about Meta. You might know us as a social media company, but we are also an AI company. We have playing an important role in also promoting choice and competition since 2017, when we open sourced PyTorch, which is a machine learning framework which is widely used across industries. And we more recently launched our AI foundation model Llama, which is open source. And this is I would really like to start from this point. I appreciate the recognition. I followed very closely the report on the AI agent. So there's some level of recognition of the role that open source AI plays in just contributing to dynamic competition and efficient competitive dynamics across, especially in downstream markets. I also like very much Zach's presentation around the competitive dynamics in downstream markets. I haven't had the pleasure of following Zach's report too closely, but that's also an area where we align, where we're seeing very dynamic competition in downstream markets for the time being, and also and as a result, they need to be cautious with regulatory intervention. When it comes to areas of improvements, I think that I'm perceiving some certain level of disconnect between some of the conclusions of the two studies. On one side, we are recognizing the efficient competitive effects and dynamics of AI in the report on cloud and AI, and also looking at in downstream markets. And on the other paper, we're essentially exploring how AI might fit the designation and the categories of core platform services under the DMA. I think it's obviously I think while the DMA might address AI and some of the competitive dynamics that might materialize in the future, I think a lot is based on presumptions on future market conditions that might not materialize. And there is a process under the DMA, which is Article 53, which allows the European Commission to have a market investigation. And especially in light of the review of the DMA, there is that opportunity to also consult the co-legislators whether there is a legislative intent behind the extension of the DMA to new markets. And so I think my recommendation here is that instead of maybe forcing the legal interpretation of some of the CPS categories, it is worth having a wider debate around the implications of bringing AI into scope of the DMA, which is an opportunity that we have with the DMA review, but we also an opportunity which is enshrined in Article 53 of the DMA. So that's very much the recommendations that I would feel to make on the report.
Thank you very much, Leo. And so we have, in fact, one question in that regard, and the question of Mark Dempsey from Article 19, asking whether we should have a designation of the AI agent as a CPS, as the current CPS, and you clearly say no. I mean, maybe we should discuss if we need a new category, but clearly not under the current law. And it's always good to remember, or at least that's my interpretation of the DMA, the CPS which have been identified at the time were digital services where the market had already tipped in favor of one or two players. And that may be one of the reasons. Of course, Gen AI as such was not present then, but that may be one of the reasons why AI was not that present as a standalone CPS. But I will ask this question, the question of Mark to Jan when I will come to you to have your view on this. And then there is another question by Kush Elmani from Mozilla on the openness of the agreement and whether, in fact, the antitrust intervention or the antitrust close scrutiny of those agreements maybe have incentivized the parties involved in those agreements to become more open and less exclusive. So that's a question that, Mark, I would like to ask you, maybe also when I will come to you, and anyone could react to this. But it's of course interesting to understand what will be the counterfactual if there was no antitrust scrutiny or, for instance, no antitrust authority whatsoever. So I think, Mark, if you can address that at some point in your intervention, it would be great. But before that, let me go to Rubing from the French authority.
Yeah, so hi everyone, and many thanks to Alexandre for the invitation, and many thanks again to the academic teams for the two insightful and remarkable reports. So there are many recommendations that I like very much, but if I must choose one, I think that I will choose the recommendation that Aurélien just mentioned. I'm glad for that, of extending the obligation of data click and query data sharing, so Article 611 of the DMA to agentic AI, and for two reasons. And the first reason, I think that there is indeed a potential very strong network effect because agentic AI is regularly trained within a reinforcement learning framework, and the data related to usage can be collected and leveraged to train the reward model and to improve the agentic model. So here we can observe probably a very similar phenomenon compared to search engine, and with the risk of network effect and winner takes all. But what I would like to react about Aurelien's intervention is that, yeah, I think for the agentic AI market, we should act quickly, because even if we have the DMA right now, but it seems difficult to restore contestability within the search engine market, because we have already kind of a winner. But for the competition within the AI market, we are still in an early stage. So we think we still have time to intervene to prevent the fact that the potential winner would take all. And the second reason I really like this recommendation is because that many reports and analyses always state that data is important for AI, but they rarely specify which data matters in which way. And here what we can see is that not everything is about training data. Perhaps the major risk for market foreclosure comes more from usage data rather than training data. And I think that's a lesson for all the policy designer when designing policy regarding data economy, is to really carefully think about which data matters and in which way. Perhaps a recommendation that I like less, I will come back to the first report, is about the carefully apply caution when designing intervention regarding vertical integrations, and more generally the approach to oppose ex-ante intervention against innovation and investment. Because at RCEP, we believe that ex-ante regulation is not a constraint, but a tool to stimulate innovation and investment. That's what we have been doing in the French telecommunication sectors. We designed ex-ante regulation to guarantee fair access, to enable alternative player to emerge and to scale up. And we provide stable and predictable regulatory framework in order to give the possibility and to facilitate long-term investment. And we think that is very important. So ex-ante intervention is not opposed to innovation and investment, and they're not opposed to antitrust. I think they are complementary. So we have already mentioned the question of partnership. I think that at the early stage, the partnerships works well because it allows AI provider to have a facilitated access to computer resources, but it does not mean that all the items are fair. I think we can see that from the recent dispute or tension between OpenAI and Microsoft, and there's some problem probably of unfair item in the partnership as well that we could address either from an antitrust point of view, or why not from an ex-ante point of view. And we think we will come back to this question, so I will stop here for now.
Thank you very much, Rewing. And I mean, of course, I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, regulation is not necessarily antinomic to innovation. I mean, regulation may be pro or anti-innovation, depending of what kind of regulation we are talking about and what form of implementation we are talking about. So I'm always also a little bit surprised when the people say regulation is against innovation. No, I don't think this is what the first report says, but I think that this is clearly not true. And I mean, the best example of a pro innovation regulation was the engineer cartel antitrust action in Silicon Valley, which has been recognized now by many as having contributed to what the Silicon Valley is about. So, but the question, of course, is that to be sure that the law we have is applied and interpreted in a pro-innovation way. And, unfortunately, it's not always the case. That we should recognize that, because there are phenomena of captures and phenomena of bad regulation or bad enforcer. So that exists too. So it's true that we have to be careful. And I would say in the context of the DMA, and more generally in the digital rule book that we have to be very careful that this law is implemented in a way which is promoting the winner and not protecting the loser of the industrial revolution, of the digital revolution. And and the big problem is that in Europe, unfortunately, we have more losers than winners so far, and so there is this risk of capture that we should not forget. But I mean, we will have the European Commission in a minute, so it will be a question that we can come back with Robert. But thanks a lot. So now let me go to the two co-author of the report. So first Mark, because he was the co-author of the first report, and then Jan. And Mark, if you can react to what you heard so far, and specifically to the question of Kosh, of whether in fact the antitrust scrutiny slash slight intervention may have contributed to the fact that we have less exclusivity in some agreement than yesterday, and anything else that you wanted to address. Mark.
Okay, so it's a very tough question. So it's a very good question, but a very tough question, because indeed,
that's why we ask it to you.
But you already answered the question in a way very, very well, Alexandre. So this is a question of the counterfactuals, and so we don't know what would have happened without such scrutiny. So in the report, in a way, so with Zach, so we argue for scrutiny and monitoring at least, so of the relationship between along the value chain of AI, because, well, we have firms with strong market power, we have high stakes, and so there might be competition concerns and maybe a strong harm to the economy. So in this sense, so we are in favor of such scrutiny, and then if it is there, then we will have the effect. So if any, anyhow, so we agree with Microsoft, as you did, Alexandre, that so diffusion is key. So indeed, so AI is a really important promise to the European economy and to European businesses. So we want to have strong competition in AI and cloud, and to accelerate the diffusion and obtain economic growth, productivity gains for European businesses. So at least it's a necessary condition. Maybe it's not sufficient, and there are other things to do in Europe to accelerate diffusion. And currently, we had a feeling with Zach that competition is vibrant. So firms seem to compete for the market rather than in the market currently. So there is really a strong dynamics and strong innovation efforts done by the firms to gain market share, develop their products, invent new products, and so we want this dynamics to continue to go on, and but we should be careful that things that could happen or potential competition problem don't slow down these dynamics or hurt these dynamics, and therefore we should be at the same time. So we are in favor of some kind of laissez-faire approach, but with scrutiny and maybe some very tailored interventions in some cases. So in particular, so we are in favor of this ban on egress fees to facilitate switching of, for example, AI developers on cloud platform, something that it should be facilitated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. And maybe if I can, because it's a word that we hear a lot nowadays, preparedness. We need to be prepared, and everyone needs to be prepared to the next things. And I think, that's how I have read your report in a way, is that authority needs to be prepared if for the harm which can happen. And it's true that maybe 20 years ago, we did some mistake with the platform economy because we were not prepared enough. But that doesn't mean that we should do the other extreme now and intervene too much. So preparedness is probably the word of the time. And also, I would say we have a lot of regulation already, as you mentioned. I mean, because the Data Act is regulation. I mean, it's not antitrust, the DMA and so on. So I think it's also we should take that into account. I mean, it's not. I don't think at all that your report is against regulation, because it just embraced the regulation we have now and advise the authority to be prepared. And for that, I mean, they need to understand exactly what could be the problem and address quickly if need be. Let's go now to Jan. Now, Jan, there are two legal questions, so you can also rely on your lawyer if you want and ask Friso back. But basically, if I can summarize the question, the two questions, so one of Mark and then the new one of Matt. And also what Leo has said, the way I see is that, I mean, we have different options to deal with this AI agent and the DMA. One is to say, okay, you leave it like that and you wait for the public debate, and maybe you have to identify a new CPS. Another one is to say, no, I mean, we have already a CPS, we can attach to it. It's just a question of a designation. And so the Commission should designate it a CPS with the current definition. And as Mark was saying, sooner rather than later. And then a sub-question in a way, and I would say that's the MAT issue, which is also very interesting, is to say, yes, but maybe it will only be a foreseeable or a future gatekeeper, and we know that in which case the type of obligation which are applicable to the prospective gatekeeper are more limited than the one which are applicable to a gatekeeper. And the question then of Matt is whether the subset of obligation which are applicable to the foreseeable gatekeeper, I don't remember the exact term, a legal term, may be not enough to address the problem. So, those are, I think, the legal debate. But so Jan, first you intervene, and then if you want, Friso, you jump in.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you very much for the nice comments on the reports. So let me take a crack at the questions, maybe zooming in from a little bit broader perspective, because our report looked at the DMA and whether or not AI agents are captured one way under the DMA. So we don't take sort of a stance on whether the DMA is good, whether the CPSs in there are the right ones, and so on, but whether one could reasonably fit AI agents under this scope. Now, the DMA, of course, has been, as you said already, Alexandre, it has been designed at a time where AI and agentic AI and also generative AI have not been front and center yet. So AI is a little bit an afterthought of the DMA. And this is when, at the outset of this project, we were pessimistic about whether or not agentic AI could be captured by the DMA in the first place at all. But to our surprise, and many critiques of the DMA have said it's not very future-proof because it is so specific to the specific competition cases that have been there in the past, and it will not apply to sort of future potential competition issues. And to our surprise, we found something different. Now, as Friso has said in his presentation, virtual assistants as a category have been deliberately introduced by the legislator in the DMA, and AI agents, virtual assistants, AI agents, sort of, it's an evolution really. So if we think that virtual assistants need to be included, then of course, I don't think it's not reasonable to think that AI agents should not be included as a CPS or as a category in the DMA, right? So looking at that evolution, to me, it is quite natural to think of AI agent as being a CPS category. Now, whether this is an entirely new category or we can actually rely on this virtual assistant one, our view is that we can rely on the virtual assistant one with a couple tweaks potentially, right? Because I think also it would be quite strange to introduce sort of an AI agent category side by side to the virtual assistant category when they capture virtually the same aspect or an evolution of the service over time, really. So this is why we are in favor of sticking with the virtual assistant category. And yes, potentially designating some of the services we see, and I'll come back to that because it relates also to Matt's question under this category. However, because the DMA has not been designed with AI front and center, there are some parts of this virtual assistant category, for example, how the definition of a business user is, which is a little bit awkward right now. And also given the fact that the potential gatekeepers would have to designate themselves, meeting some thresholds and meeting a category, there should be some certainty, legal certainty, onto which services this applies and whether AI agents potentially fall under it or not. And even if we don't speak about AI agents in the narrow sense as we've introduced them in the port, there's also these things in between, like chatbots, like the ChatGPT type of services, which also make heavily use of search engines and also supposed to be designated under the DSA as such, and under the DMA, it would likely also be there. Now, coming to the question of, I think what the legal term is emergent gatekeeper here, then we already addressed this a little bit in the report and say, well, on the one hand, we don't think that the thresholds per se that are in the DMA right now need to be adapted. Because they also seem to be fitting to this category. Many of the services that we talk about, like ChatGPT type of services, they already probably have the user threshold numbers. I mean, we don't know for sure because they have not come out and forward with this, but because of the DSA designation, which has the same user number threshold, it's very likely they already fulfill that. So the only thing that's missing is basically the turnover and to have that over a sufficient number of time over the stretch of 3 years. And that will come sooner than later anyway. Now, the question, therefore, is a little bit academic, I think. By the time we've clarified whether or not we should have the emergent gatekeeper for them, they probably are a proper gatekeeper in their own, if we have the proper CPS category or have the clarification we recommend in the report on this. And also, I think probably the list of services, even in this emergent gatekeeper, it's basically the less onerous obligations, data portability obligations, and so on. But the ones that would be relevant here are probably mostly the 6-7, so the vertical integration, vertical interoperability type of obligations, which are not under the emergent gatekeeper category right now. And also click and search data is not currently. So my answer to you, I mean, in the short, to sum up, my answer is we're neither here or there. So we neither probably say that the existing virtual assistant category should, we think there should be some legal clarification done there, but it's more minor. It's probably more, it's not really a new CPS service. We're not going as far. And we also don't think that the emergent gatekeeper status will have a lot of benefits here potentially, because this is happening so fast and so quickly that there will not be in the emergent gatekeeper status for long. And maybe final point is on competitiveness in general. I think the whole idea of the DMA is to keep markets open, to keep them active. So we see some activity and we see some competitiveness here today. But clearly there is a potential to foreclose other agents once they become vertically integrated on the operating system. And I think the whole idea of the DMA is to intervene quick and early to prevent sort of these monopolizations happening. And this is why we shouldn't sit this out and wait too long. And basically what we're recommending is just play out the DMA as it is, some minor tweaks, but by and large, we are surprised and we're happy for the fact that it works pretty well in this context.
Thank you, Ian. I guess Robert, who will speak at the end, will be happy to hear that. So I don't know if some of the panelists wants to react on what you have heard. Aurélien, yes, just raise your hands.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Alexandre. I just want to say I completely agree with what Jan just said. The DMA is already, I think, a very useful tool to address these challenges. And I would say, I think it's a great thing to think about how AI agent, as they emerge, can fit into the virtual assistant definition, how this can be amended. But I think also it's really important to not lose sight of today, of AI being integrated into existing CPS, or conversely, existing CPSs being integrated into AI first products that are already used and in certain circumstances can already be used to circumvent. And I mentioned the example of Gemini earlier, which today is set as the default on Android and Chrome and can be used to search the web and is not impacted by, or at least Google does not apply the choice screen and switching obligations there to that particular product.
Thank you. Ruben, I don't know, if you want to say something, and then Leo?
Actually, I would like to say exactly the same thing that Aurélien just mentioned regarding and I think there's a very interesting point with this report regarding the foreclosure of agentic AI is that the designation should be carried on other CPS, such as operation system, such as search engine, such as other things, rather than the agentic AI themselves. For example, I would like to continue on the example of Aurélien. When using Gemini, you have easier access to Google Search, Google Maps, and YouTube. 3 of them are already designated CPS. So I think that I strongly agree with the analysis of Yang. Perhaps a first step to ensure the openness of agentic AI is to implement it, to apply the DMA, but on the existing category of CPS, such as search engine.
Thank you. Leo?
Yeah, no, just to react to the point raised by Jan about AI being an afterthought. I do think that it wasn't an afterthought. I mean, there was a debate on the AI Act in parallel, right? There was a extensive political debate on AI as we were negotiating the DMA in Brussels. I think also essentially policymakers have started looking at the questions around AI since 2017, right? With the high-level expert group on AI. So there were opportunities to kind of, have already an intervention by the co-legislators, which I don't think that's what happened on the virtual assistance definition. If you look at the annex, for example, for the methodology for counting end users of the virtual assistant CPS, the methodology suggests that it looks at like smart home appliances and smart home devices. And with that, I'm not saying that, I'm not maybe I'm completely wrong and that's what the co-legislator were trying to do. But I think that to your point that you were also raising, Alexandre, there needs to be a wider debate. And I think that we have the opportunity under the DMA to explore more extensively these questions and not rushing interpretations, also considering the implications of these decisions. I do think, obviously, that while I don't think it was an afterthought, the market dynamics have evolved, obviously, over time. And it's really where we need to focus the lens, whether the market will remain efficient. If that is the case, then an intervention might not be justified. But of course, if the dynamics change all of a sudden, I think that there is a process under the DMA for assessing that, of course.
Thank you, Leo. I don't know if other panelists wants to come in before I give the word to Robert. Maybe Chloe, if you have one advice to the European Commission, now that we will hear Robert from the European Commission, in the context of AI, what would it be?
Thank you. I think that's a good question. I think that I would listen to what I've been hearing from the European Commission, which is that I think that actually a lot of this AI, you need to look at the outcome of what it's doing, and a lot is already embedded in technology, and therefore, from my perspective, probably already regulated in some way, especially when we look at the top of the stack, especially when we're looking at what is it that this AI enables consumers to do. And so far from giving them advice, I'd be taking their advice and listening to them and again, focusing on what is that really pro-competitive thing that, we can help to do, both in terms of the diffusion and in terms of, enabling a really successful AI, open AI cloud ecosystem to enable those European companies and consumers to thrive.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chloe, and thank you very much for all the panelists for this interesting discussion on those CERRE report, which again, I repeat, are on the CERRE website. And so maybe the last leg of this webinar is Robert Bendits from the European Commission. So Robert, I mean, you have heard a lot. I mean, you have read also the report or their recommendation. And so what I think we would all be interested in is your view on your takeaway on those recommendation and on what you have heard so far and what you take from that. And again, thank you very much for joining us. For the last part of the session, we always try to put the commission at the end, so we show that the people stay until the end. So Robert, you have
Sure. Thanks, Alexandra. I will try to live up to this introduction and expectation. Well, first of all, thanks to the authors for these reports. I think they are very informative, very insightful. They are long and detailed and well reasoned, and it's what informs what we do. I do wish I had more time to read this kind of reports. Now I did make the time. I think we also inputted into some of these already early on, because that's really valuable to us, to our work, and that's, I think, even, I mean, particularly clear for the report from Fisco and Jan, right? Because that's really about how the DMA applies concretely to the practices and the services we see today. While the report from Zach and Mark, it's a bit a broader approach, looking in particular at upstream issues, foreclosure issues for AI, from including looking at cloud practices. So it's quite complementary and in that respect also interesting. I mean, I want to say here at the beginning, we did open today the public consultation on the review of the DMA. So it's a happy coincidence. So you're obviously all welcome to input there, and I'm sure you will and you should. So we're reviewing the DMA now and then every 3 years to assess its effectiveness. It's imperfect naturally, so we want to improve it. Now AI obviously is a hot button issue, and it's an evolving market and technology, right? So indeed, to Chloe's point, I mean, we're in regulatory dialogue. We're listening very carefully to complaints and also to argument that something is innovation promoting, something is nascent, something is just like developing, and we should give it some time. And in fact, we haven't intervened yet. So, I mean, so any criticism on that is a bit maybe premature, but we're looking into this. Clearly, it's a priority for us. And the potential and the benefits, they're obvious, potential for consumers and for businesses. Now, I work for the DMA team, so I'm coming a bit from that perspective, but obviously there are many other tools. The AI Act has been mentioned, the Data Act has been mentioned, antitrust has been mentioned. So all these tools together form a admittedly dense regulatory framework, but I would talk mostly about the DMA. Now, maybe looking first into the remarks from Zach and Mark. As I said, it's more like upstream, and under the DMA, the cloud services is a CPS, but no one has been designated yet. But maybe in the future. And I think it raises many important points, and I think does a great job in mapping out the issues, including lock-in into cloud providers. So in foreclosure via access to not providing access to certain data. These are very important things that we're looking into. But I think one thing that's close to my heart is to underline that in particular the DMA is based in many respects on the idea of a level playing field. So I do see obviously that these are evolving markets, but the DMA only applies, would then apply to cloud providers with an extremely high number of business users and end users. So one wonders whether looking at this and then looking at practices like tying, leveraging, self-preferencing, that typically, indeed, in vertical integration scenarios, can be pro-competitive, but for companies that are gatekeepers and have a certain size, the legislator has made a decision to say certain practices should be prohibited. And I think the paper doesn't look only at these companies, right? It looks at the entire the entire area, all companies that are active in that area, and argues there are many more actually. But if you have companies that are very powerful in the upstream service and are vertically integrated into AI, which Microsoft, Alphabet, and Google, they all are, and Amazon all are, that can give rise to concerns, and the DMA will be there to and has clear provisions, do's and don'ts in that respect. And so that's an important point. However, I do agree clearly, obviously, that a balanced approach protecting the dynamism in the market and requiring evidence-based enforcement, that is a given, that makes a lot of sense. And we should indeed tread carefully. But I would caution, in particular under the DMA, against the wait and see approach. I mean, we wait and see, but not for too long. And I don't know, requiring evidence of imminent tipping is it may not be the right standard. Clearly, it may not be the right standard. So I think one has to analyze these markets very carefully. When it comes to NVIDIA, which also is highlighted in the report, and its strong position in the accelerator chipset market, I think it's not designated under the DMA. There may not be a CPS that fits unless one gets extremely creative. So that may be a antitrust issue, and could be one. And then there are some other findings. I mean, like that there are thousands of foundation models, currently competing. That may all be right, but then I do fear these things will consolidate. And it's also about the distribution, of course, right? Who sits in the access points? Who gets to reach the users, the business users? What are the choke points? So one should take a broader view, I feel. When it comes to Meta, Apple, and other players who are not integrated into the cloud, I mean, some are integrated obviously into operating systems, which are very important, as we know from the Fisco and from the paper written by Fisco and Jan. And I mean, yeah, it's a bit like the buyer power argument in antitrust and merger control. I think that has many pitfalls, but it's something to look at. DeepSeek, obviously now facing privacy issues in Germany. I mean, it's a complex field, and one shouldn't simplify. But I do think that it maps out the issues very well. And for instance, when it comes to moving data across different cloud providers, I think 610 in the DMA may cover that. Yeah, and then also, I mean, on the point that the partnership of Microsoft and OpenAI has been successful and pro-competitive, yeah, that may well be, and I think it has been allowed, and no one has intervened, but it doesn't mean that there aren't many other potential competition issues that we should look into. Okay. Moving on to the second paper on agentic AI, that is something that we're looking into actively, obviously, for the reasons mentioned. I think it asks the right questions, is well drafted. I mean, I'm happy to hear that the DMA, the legislators appear to be very prescient when it comes to AI and the VA category as a CPS. I'm happy to hear that the outcome of the research is that what is here termed agentic AI may well fit that definition. This is something we're looking into. I mean, obviously, the designation issues have been highlighted. They need to meet the thresholds for 3 years. But I do also agree it seems to be an evolution from voice assistants, right? I mean, Siri is still called Siri, right? It will be much more powerful, but it's still called Siri, and it's still mostly invoked by voice. Obviously, under the hood, it's technically more complex, more powerful, but nevertheless, there are clear similarities. Now, I also like the distinction between foreclosure of agentic AI providers and by those providers, and how it's then mapped out, what applies to each category. I think one classification or dichotomy maybe that has been raised by Rubing and Aurélien is what applies today as opposed what only would apply once services are designated as VAs, right? And I think the report helpfully highlights the close link of these agentic AI services to the operating system, and makes the link that, oh yeah, the DMA actually seems to be future-proof because the operating system is a CPS, and there are 3 companies designated, Microsoft, Apple, and Alphabet. And looking at these services, which I think they can be extremely powerful, obviously, and really become potentially the key access point on smartphones, but also on personal computers, I suppose. You talk to an agent, you tell them, certain things they have to do. It's, while you do something else on the screen, so in the background, it moves into different apps, accesses them, gets information. The app sends something back. The assistant then processes that, sends it on, and ultimately get an answer. And I know which playground I have to go, which is the closest, the nicest. It has a really nice restaurant in a walking distance. And it's all with a single command. And that requires a lot of technology under the hood to work. And that's intermediated by the operating system in many, many cases. And these cross-app commands that operate in the background require interoperability, deep interoperability under Article 6.7, and Article 6.7 applies today to operating systems. It would also apply to VAs once designated, but there would be another step of integration. Similarly, you want to have access as a third-party competitor to Gemini, for instance, on Android phones, to the wake word, to your own wake word that's always on. So if the phone is in lock screen mode, lying next on the table, and you can talk to the phone and invoke the voice assistant. So that also is an interop issue. And then something else to mention, maybe, because also it's about obviously foundation models, right? There are some that are on device and some that are in the cloud. And there are different requirements and also use cases for these models, which again is an interop issue, and it's not all equally open. So 6.7 applies today and is critical, alongside also 6.3 for agentic AI, which might be extremely important. Okay, so other recommendations. So on the recommendation number 1, and I did print screen the slides here, is to clarify a bit the virtual assistant category to increase legal certainty and legitimacy. I think we'll take that away, right? I mean, I can see the point. I do think the business user definition is quite flexible, make accessible, right? Make their apps or actions accessible. But clarification for legitimacy reasons never hurts. I think these are good observations. 6.11 has been mentioned a couple of times. The suitability to help AI players to get click and query data. Clearly, this data is important for AI services, as they are providing data based on the internet, right? So they need access to search technology. They need access to a search index, the so-called grounding of the results. That's very important. So in a way, they incorporate or rely on some kind of search technology to a large extent. And we're looking into whether 6.11 can cover that. But it's a very important point. And it's well understood. So that's a key point, I think, under today's situation where there are no VAs designated. The point on 5.7, so that's one of the tying provisions, that an operating system provider may force upon business users apps the use to integrate with their virtual assistant. I don't think we have seen this yet. but it could happen. And it's something we will also look into. I think that's also it's a good point. I mean, there's obviously a parallel to the web engines that are covered, right? It's technology based. So it could fit nicely. And indeed, it wouldn't be covered by Article 5.8, the other tying provision, which might cover VAs if they meet the threshold, even prior to designation. And it gets quite legal and technical now. But it requires then subscription and registration. And then finally, the point on 6.12, that friend access to cloud computing services that could be added to 6.12, which is currently limited to search engines, app stores, and something else. It's also a very valid point, and we'll look into that. Okay, so I think I covered a lot of ground. My final words, well, yeah, it is a priority. It is an evolving market, so we're indeed treading very carefully here and listening to players. And it's an ongoing regulatory dialogue. And having the DMA in place to structure this dialogue, I think is very important. It's very different from the antitrust world, where the provisions are much more open textured by nature. The investigations would then be much longer, and you have discussions about effects, and there maybe even be an expectation to wait for effects to actually materialize, right? So the DMA is a better tool, and I think it's the right tool to be in place for this particular technological revolution. On the provocative point that we should be promoting the winner, not the loser, made by Alexandre. Absolutely. I think what's important to us and to the DMA legislator is that the path to winning is one that is level, the level playing field. Yeah, and I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert, for being so precise in in addressing the recommendation of the report. This is always very appreciated, that we can have contribute in a way to an effective and proportionate implementation of digital regulation. This is really our DNA. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say so first that the report, but also know the recording of this conference, of this webinar, will be available on the YouTube channel of CERRE. So you can rewatch it or send it to colleagues if relevant. Also to tell you that we will continue, of course, to work on all those issues at the think tank. So we have an annual DMA implementation forum, CERRE forum, and we aim to contribute to the review process that has just been launched today, as it has been recalled by several speakers. So we will analyze in the this year forum what is the impact of the DMA so far, and whether we are going in the right direction or not. And in terms of diffusion of AI, which is so important, as Chloe mentioned it, we have also another forum on EU competitiveness, where this issue is at the core. So stay tuned, because we will continue to work on this and to diffuse what we think is the right approach for all of that. So in conclusion, let me thank very much the audience for your question, the panelists for your time and for your intervention, the author, of course, for your recommendation, and finally the CERRE communication and event team to put that. It's not easy to put those seminars. So thank you very much for all of you for organizing that, and see you next time. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.